G'day, Dave here, and it's day 11, the 11th of December, one fortnight left until Christmas. And we've been looking at how God has made plans. He's made plans to Abraham to make Abraham the father of a great nation. And through Abraham's descendants, God is going to bring blessing to the world. And we keep looking down through Abraham's line. We're looking for one who might fulfill that promise. And then you eventually find that Abraham's line leads you to David. And David's to become the king. And so the focus of God's plans isn't simply through Abraham now, but through Abraham, and then the subset is through David, particularly King David. And so we look at the promises to David that his son is going to rule over God's eternal kingdom. But of course, each of the kings after David live and do their thing, and then they die. And you keep working through, and it's a problem, really, because not only are they human and mortal, but the problem with these kings is that they're disobedient. They're constantly failing as kings to rule in God's kingdom. Some of them are better than others, but most of them are pretty horrific. And it really does seem like God's promises are massively under threat. How can he possibly set up his eternal kingdom ruled by a descendant of David? Well, humanly speaking, that is impossible, but not with God. And so God enters into our world, and he prepares us for his entry into our world through promises made to the prophets. I want to read one by the prophet Isaiah. And he's talking about a time when there's great darkness and distress. And it says in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 1, "Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who are in distress. In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, but in the future, he will honor Galilee of the nations by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan." God is making a promise to bring blessing that will focus on this area of Galilee, and great light will come into the darkness. And the promise in particular is that a child will be born who will bring about a reversal for God's people. Their distress, their gloom, their oppression, they're caught up in the sickness and sadness and death of this world. That will be reversed. And there'll be a new king, a king who rules over the eternal kingdom. And I want to pick it up in these words. And we often hear these words at Christmas, but they were written 800 years before Jesus. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this." See, here is a promise made 800 years before Jesus, that a child will be born who will be the one who rules on David's throne. He will be the one who sets up God's eternal kingdom. He will rule with justice and righteousness. This one will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. These are names of God. And yet this child will bear these names. Here, you see, is the promise that God will come to his people, that God will become a human baby, and that he will grow up to rule over God's kingdom forever. It's great news, isn't it, that we have a hope that in the darkness and despair of this world, God has entered in. He's become human. He's lived and he's died and he's been raised from the dead to be the eternal King. And the Word of God tells us that if we will come to this one, if we will bow down before this King, if we will put our trust in this child that was born, then we can live in his kingdom forever and ever. That is the message of Christmas, and it's great news, promised by God so many hundreds, now even thousands of years ago.